everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Error Exploration series. Today's video will be all about miscut cards, going in depth on the conditions that cause these errors, the requirements for a card to be considered a miscut, which grading companies will accept them, and how to tell if miscuts you come across online are factory cut or cut from a sheet post-production. So let's get right into it, starting with a breakdown of the cutting process. It starts with a stack of sheets being loaded into the machine. The top sheet is lifted upwards with airflow and gripped by suction cups before being fed under the rollers. The suction cups have been found lodged within cards on incredibly rare occasion, but that's for another video. The sheets are then sent through the first cylinder of blades one by one, first being cut horizontally when it comes to Pokémon card sheets, with small connections left over to hold the sheet together. Here's a closer look at the first series of blades in action. After exiting the rotary cutting blades, they are pulled along by a conveyor system, pushing the sheets against a guide rail so they can be aligned and cut vertically into individual cards. Afterwards, the cards are pulled down a belt, where they'll be left in a neat stack to be checked by quality control, assuming the employee isn't taking an extended lunch break. Cards then make their way to the cornering machine, where one of two different systems are used to finalize the cards. For cards that are cut to the correct dimensions straight from the sheet, they go into a machine functionally similar to this one. One by one, stacks of cards are pulled back into a slot with no room to move around, having the corners chopped off. This system provides little to no room for miscuts, as the cards wouldn't fit into the mechanism to begin with if they were askew or rotated. Now, this may lead you to ask, but Brehella, if this machine is designed to prevent errors, then how can there be miscuts caused by the cornering machine? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, there is actually a second type of cornering machine designed for cards that are cut from the sheet slightly oversized, thus needing the excess cardstock trimmed off. This is not the machine used by Millennium Print Group to cut Pokémon cards, but it functions quite similarly. Cards are fed in by hand before being pushed through a cutting die that removes excess cardstock and rounds the corners. This process creates the opportunity for human error, where cards can be left sticking out of the stack at an angle, or enter the die rotated 90 degrees, along with other possibilities that we'll cover in this video. This is the cornering machine used by Millennium Print Group. Similar concept, but the cards are pushed up through a die. And this is the side-by-side of the two different types of cornering machines, followed by a clip of the cards being pushed out of the cutting die by the second type of machine we were taking a look at. The card on the right is what I was referring to when I said some cards are cut from the sheet oversized. Now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's take a deep dive into each type of miscut card, starting with minor miscuts. The three most basic types of miscuts occur when the sheet isn't aligned properly when going through the slitter, leading one or both rotary blades to cut the sheet askew. However, minor miscuts can also occur if an oversized card is shifted over slightly when going into the cornering machine. Minor miscuts are defined as showing at least half of an alignment dot on the front or back of the card. I intentionally decided to use this Electabuzz to show the error, because some Wizard of the Coast cards don't use alignment dots on the back, some don't even use them on the front, and heck, some don't use them at all. But don't be fooled. What appears to be a minor miscut with an alignment dot in the corner may actually just be an off-center card that was cut poorly by the cornering machine. A real alignment dot would be a perfect circle, and on a properly centered card would be located where the vertical and horizontal edges intersect, had the corners not been rounded. If you don't understand that, then don't worry. Here's a square cut to show you what I'm talking about. On a perfectly centered card, the alignment dots will be barely visible on all four corners before they're removed by the cornering machine. Now, back to the topic at hand. PSA will grade minor miscuts as either OC or MC, depending on the severity, whereas CGC will grade them as minor miscuts. But be warned, PSA will not grade cards that are misshapen. That includes cards that are slightly missized, have edges that don't all meet at 90-degree angles, or corners that aren't properly rounded. Next up we have miscuts, which are defined as being severe enough to show part of another card. This Eternatus has alignment dots on both sides denoting where its corner should be, and the alignment dots for the trainer card next to it on the sheet. However, it is not required for this to be the case in order for a card to be considered miscut. There are a number of different variations of the standard miscut card. For example, while the Eternatus is miscut horizontally, this Genesect is miscut vertically. Both cards have a line to denote the cutoff between cards on the sheet. This seems to be exclusive to cards that are initially cut oversized. If anything beyond this line is showing, then your card is definitely a miscut. However, some cards like this Zekrom don't have the cutoff line, and therefore, if they don't show the internal part of the next card, they may not be recognized as miscuts, instead being called minor miscuts. The next variation would be edge of sheet miscuts, which show the white or raw hollow foil edge of the sheet on the front. Normally, the edge of the sheet is white on the back, but it seems it may be the same color blue as the rest of the card back on occasion. The last type of miscut is a color bar miscut. Sheets will have color bars printed in the margins to show the colors of ink used and allow their densities to be checked for quality assurance. If miscut in the correct direction, a sheet can show the color bar or even text on the margins of a sheet like the Bisharp earlier. PSA will grade miscuts as MC, whereas CGC will grade them as miscut. Now moving on to major miscuts, which are defined as showing 3 or more cards simultaneously. Such severe miscuts are incredibly rare in the main Pokémon TCG because they require the entire sheet was either cut at a significant angle or the sheet was miscut by both sets of rotary blades. The Golem seemingly came from a sheet that was cut at a significant angle, leading each card to show a different amount of the surrounding cards. I've personally seen a few genuine major miscuts in the main TCG that came from a sheet that was cut twisted, whereas the others appear to be from sheets that were cut rotated 180 degrees, leading them to line up with the blades incorrectly on account of differing amounts of salvage on the edges of the sheet. PSA will grade major miscuts as MC, but most are misshapen, so they will get denied. CGC grades them as major miscuts. But a word of warning to those of you who shop for error cards online. Some people take uncut sheets that escape the factory and intentionally cut them up to create what look like miscut cards. These are known as NFC cards, and are typically cut in a way that wouldn't really be possible under normal factory conditions. The Trick or Trade sets are the biggest target, as dozens of sheets from these sets were stolen from the factory and sold online. The same is true of Rebel Clash in smaller quantities. Vintage sheets like the KB Toys Fossil Holo sheet, German Neo sheets, Jungle Non-Holos, and various test sheets have been cut post-production as well. Extremely severe miscuts on cards from these sets should be presumed non-factory cut. However, if looking at the corners of a non-factory cut card, you will notice they noticeably differ from a factory cut card. Many aren't quite as round, are cut with poor quality, or even have extra card stock hanging off. Not all miscuts that appear too good to be true are actually NFC though. Instead, you can have misalignment errors like this one here, which are actually misprints rather than miscuts, but those will be covered in the next video. With all that out of the way, we can finally get into errors caused by the cornering machine, starting with twisted miscuts. Twisted miscuts traditionally occur when a card enters the cornering machine at an angle, with the die cutter leaving the card misshapen if the card is at a severe enough angle. I may have told a bit of a lie when I said we're going to be talking about cornering machine miscuts, seeing as twisted miscuts can be caused by a full sheet of cards getting cut at an angle, just to be further mangled by the cornering machine. For a card to be considered a twisted miscut, it generally needs to be either twisted enough to be misshapen or twisted enough for any part of the card within the borders to be cut off. PSA will grade twisted miscuts as MC, but only if they're shaped normally. CGC will grade them as twisted miscuts, and has cases that will accommodate misshapen cards. For the very first miscut caused exclusively by the cornering machine, and I mean it this time, we have rotated miscuts. These occur when a card enters the cutting die rotated 90 degrees. Seeing as these cards were cut sideways, there will be additional cardstock on one or two of the edges of the card where it didn't extend far enough to reach the die. Meanwhile, the top of the card, bottom of the card, or both will be chopped off and 2 or 4 corners will be left squared off. Rotated miscuts are not full cards, and as such PSA will not grade them. So long as 50% or more of the card is there, CGC will give them the 90-degree rotated miscut designation. That's a mouthful. Some people will make the case that these can be reproduced simply by cutting a card with scissors. This is not true, as the excess cardstock on the borders proves that rotated miscuts and other miscuts caused by the cornering machine are in fact legitimate. We're approaching the end now, so let's take a quick look at narrow miscuts. These occur when a card shifts horizontally before entering the cutting die, causing one edge to be cut too deep while the other didn't extend far enough to have the corners rounded or the excess cardstock removed. These are defined as being smaller than a standard card, with one border having excess cardstock. Technically, it is not required that they have two square corners, so long as the corners on the left or right side weren't fully rounded as a result of the card not extending far enough into the cutting die. It should qualify as a narrow miscut. Yet again, PSA will not touch these, but CGC will grade them as narrow miscuts so long as 50% or more of the card remains. Finally, we have short miscuts, which I unfortunately don't have an example for. However, short miscuts have the same form factor as a rotated miscut, so we'll simply use this one from earlier to demonstrate it for you. Narrow miscuts occur when a card shifts vertically before entering the cornering die, thus leaving excess cardstock on the top or bottom, with the opposite side being cut too deep. Short miscuts are also defined as being smaller than a standard card, with the bottom traditionally being left oversized and squared off, but it shouldn't be necessary that two of the corners are fully square, so long as the corners didn't extend far enough for all the corners to be fully rounded. PSA strikes again with cases not made for misshapen cards, whereas CGC will label them as short miscuts so long as 50% or more of the card is present and accounted for. Viewers with existing knowledge on error cards may have noticed that miscuts caused by the cornering machine don't seem to happen to Wizard of the Coast error cards. At most, you'll have an instance where an entire sheet was cut at an angle as opposed to a single card. Now you may find yourself inclined to go down to the comments and tell me I'm wrong, but don't fret, because I've yet to mention the one exception to this rule, Ancient Mew. Narrow miscuts and a lot of twisted miscuts, emphasis on a lot of twisted miscuts, have surfaced over time of this particular card, and Ancient Mew just so happens to be the only card from the era that I know of to have been cut from the sheet oversized. And it just so happens to be the only one with miscuts from the cornering machine.
Coincidence? I think not!
Ancient Mew was likely cut with a similar die to what's used on modern oversized cards, therefore allowing for miscuts when they weren't possible on all the other Wizards of the Coast era Pokémon cards, because those were cut to size straight from the sheet. That about wraps things up. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope everyone learned something here today. I plan to include square cuts in the video, but it's been running a bit long as it is. So please leave a like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload the next video in the Error Exploration series. I'll see you all in the next one.